Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today. You know, if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by the constant flood of news about global warming, emissions targets, and these incredibly complex international treaties, well, you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we are going to decode the massive, sometimes super intimidating web of global climate change mitigation. We're going to organize all of this dense information into a clear, structured survival guide for our planet and map out exactly how all the pieces of this giant global puzzle fit together. To make sure we avoid any information fatigue, we're breaking this giant alphabet soup of acronyms into 6 logical parts: the mitigation toolbox, erasing our carbon footprint, the global climate rulebook, financing the green transition, India's action blueprint, and finally, the ozone success story. Let's get right to it. Section 1, the mitigation toolbox, stopping climate change. So, before we can actually fix the problem, we kind of need a baseline. According to the UN Environment Program, climate change mitigation specifically refers to efforts to reduce or prevent the emission of greenhouse gases. Now, I really want to ground our entire explainer right here, because mitigation isn't just about adapting to a hotter world or merely surviving it. It literally means stopping it at the source. It's about utilizing brilliant new tech, massively scaling up renewables, making our clunky old infrastructure way more energy efficient, and fundamentally shifting our everyday consumer behaviors. Moving on to Section 2, erasing our carbon footprint, and looking at sector strategies. Let's move to and see how this builds. How do we actually go about erasing that footprint? Well, when we look at mitigation strategies across different sectors, it's truly a top-to-bottom approach. Over in the energy sector, we're talking about massive, systemic infrastructure shifts, like fossil fuel switching toward renewables and nuclear power. For buildings, it's about smart grids and zero-energy designs. But this isn't just about giant factories. Demand-side mitigation involves things like reducing the massive losses in our global food supply chain and even tweaking our own human diets toward less emission-intensive products. So it really ranges from global power grids straight down to what's on your dinner plate. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the split we see in negative emission technologies. Basically, methods that actually pull carbon right out of the air. We see a pretty fascinating divide here. First, we have natural methods, things like planting trees, managing soil carbon, and using biochar. These are incredible because they're relatively cheap and we can deploy them right now. But the catch is they're vulnerable to reversal. I mean, a forest can burn down, releasing all that stored carbon back into the sky. On the flip side, we have technological methods, like direct air capture, where giant machines literally vacuum CO2 from the ambient air, or ocean alkalinity enhancement. These are much less vulnerable to reversal for sure, but they're highly engineered, currently way more expensive, and require a ton of ongoing R&D.
But what if we merge nature and tech? Let me demystify a really cool acronym for you, BECCS, which stands for Bioenergy with Carbon Capture and Storage. Here's how the step-by-step process works. Step 1, we use natural plants to pull CO2 from the atmosphere and convert it into biomass. Step 2, we take that biomass and use it to fuel our energy systems, which gives us heat or power. And step 3, instead of letting the resulting CO2 just float away into the atmosphere, we use technology to capture it and permanently lock it deep underground, often in old, depleted petroleum reservoirs. It is just a brilliant combination of natural biology and high-tech engineering working in perfect harmony.
All right, Section 3, the Global Climate Rulebook, dealing with international policies. Let's be real, science and technology can't operate in a vacuum. They need rules. To actually force companies to emit less, the world uses carbon pricing to essentially hit them right in the wallet, financially incentivizing lower emissions. Let's break these 3 complex economic concepts down into really simple terms. First is the emissions trading system, commonly known as cap and trade. This puts a hard cap on total emissions. If a company is super efficient, they can actually sell their leftover allowance to a heavier polluter. Second is a carbon tax. This is straightforward. It just charges a set fee for every single ton of greenhouse gas emitted. And third, offset mechanisms, where you can fund a green project somewhere else in the world, earning carbon credits that you can use towards your own compliance goals. Now, these economic mechanisms didn't just appear overnight. They were born out of decades of incredibly complex international diplomacy. The whole history of these UN COP meetings is really a fascinating narrative of global consensus building. It all started getting some major teeth back in 1997 with the Kyoto Protocol, which set binding targets, though mainly just for developed industrialized nations at the time. Fast forward to 2009, the Copenhagen Accord kept that momentum going and laid some absolutely crucial financial groundwork. And all of this ultimately culminated in 2015 with the landmark Paris Agreement. That was the moment the whole globe finally stepped up to the plate with a legally binding international treaty. So the crucial point is that all of this consensus building led to one central legally binding goal: limiting the global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius, while actively pursuing efforts to keep it locked at 1.5 degrees. To make sure we actually stay on track and don't just talk about it, countries are required to implement and update what they call nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, on a strict 5-year cycle. This forces nations to constantly push for more ambition. Section 4, Financing the Green Transition. Let's talk about the global climate funds. Ambition is fantastic, right? But we absolutely cannot build a green future without green money. We're effectively opening up the global wallet here. Let's act as a translator for some of the biggest acronyms in climate finance. First, there's the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. This was established way back in 1992 and is managed by the World Bank. It's broad. It serves multiple environmental conventions, dealing with everything from biodiversity to desertification. Then you've got the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. Set up in 2010, this is the world's largest dedicated fund specifically designed to serve the Paris Agreement. It's entirely focused on helping developing nations finance their emission reductions and climate responses. Under those massive umbrellas, we also have some highly targeted funds. The Least Developed Countries Fund, or LDCF, is entirely dedicated to supporting climate adaptation for the world's most vulnerable. Together with the Special Climate Change Fund, they pay particular attention to societies facing the most immediate existential threats. I mean, this is literally about human survival, helping nations like small island developing states and African states actively prepare national adaptation programs to protect their communities. Moving to Section 5, India's Action Blueprint, focusing on domestic climate action. It's one thing to talk about these massive international funds and treaties, but let's zoom in on a specific case study to see how these tools work in the real world. And this brilliantly illustrates how a country translates global agreements into domestic action. India's National Action Plan on Climate Change created these highly targeted, ministry-led missions. For instance, you have the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy driving the National Solar Mission. The Environment Ministry is leading the Green India Mission, which aims to add and improve a staggering 10 million hectares of forest cover. And the Jal Shakti Ministry is pushing the National Water Mission for vital conservation. These domestic missions feed directly into India's international pledges, those NDCs we talked about earlier. Goal 3 of India's NDC is a massive, highly ambitious target. They are aiming to reduce the emissions intensity of their GDP by 33 to 35% by the year 2030. Compared to 2005 levels. Furthermore, Goal 4 aims to dramatically shift how the entire country gets its electricity. By 2030, India is targeting to achieve about 40% of its cumulative electric power installed capacity strictly from non-fossil fuel-based energy resources. That is a monumental shift for a rapidly developing, extremely energy-hungry economy. But what I really love is how these giant national goals connect straight down to everyday grassroots applications. Through the PAT scheme, industries are actively trading energy efficiency certificates. Through the Ujala program, the government pushed this massive distribution of highly affordable energy-efficient LED bulbs to millions of households, cutting electricity demand right at the source. Even the Swachh Bharat mission for sanitation includes establishing local waste-to-energy plants. It just proves that mitigation happens just as much in our living rooms and local municipalities as it does in UN conference halls. And finally, Section 6, the ozone success story, a historical parallel. Look, learning about all of this can sometimes feel like a massive uphill battle, right? Are we actually capable of fixing the global atmosphere? Well, back in the 1980s, the world was facing a catastrophic hole in the ozone layer caused by everyday chemicals in our aerosols and refrigerators. But trace this history with me. In 1985, we got the Vienna Convention. By 1987, the world enacted the Montreal Protocol, which regulated and phased out the production of nearly 100 man-made ozone-depleting substances. And they didn't even stop there. In 2016, with the Kigali Amendment, they agreed to phase down HFCs, replacing them with safer alternatives. We identified an atmosphere crisis, we built a global toolkit, and we literally healed the sky. This historical parallel leaves us with one incredibly powerful fact. The Montreal Protocol remains the only United Nations treaty to ever be ratified by every single country on Earth, all 198 member states. Every nation agreed, every nation acted. So I want to leave you with this question. If we banded together to save the ozone layer, armed with this incredible new toolkit we've explored today, can we do it again for the climate? I absolutely believe we can. Thank you so much for joining me to decode this critical topic. Keep learning, stay curious, and I will see you in the next explainer.